I'm Steve Yates, the Associate Director and Marketing Director at University Press of Mississippi. Welcome to a very special author conversation tonight. We're glad you're here and especially glad to celebrate two of our authors, Lisa M. Corrigan and Andre E. Johnson, and Davis W. Houck, our editor and our author as part of University Press of Mississippi's 50th anniversary celebration. UPM was founded in 1970 and for 50 years now has served as the publishing expression of Mississippi's 8 public universities. From our offices in Jackson, we acquire, edit, design, produce, and market over 100 new books each year. What began with 2 employees on the campus of University of Southern Mississippi is now a global operation employing 20 full-time publishers and 2 part-time. Some housekeeping, if I may please. This Zoom will be recorded and available for later viewing at UPM's Vimeo site and at our YouTube channel. We hope you will share it if you find it valuable. All but our 3 participants will remain muted. However, there's a chat available to you in Zoom, and please lodge your questions there. When we open the discussion to questions at about 6:50 Central Time, Davis will read them out to us and we'll keep the conversation going that way. We wish that we could be with you in person at the National Communication Association meeting, but COVID-19 has robbed us of that interaction. Happily, on our website, the entire Race, Rhetoric, and Media Studies series, which includes both of tonight's new books, will be on sale from now until November 29th. You can use discount code RRAM2020 and you'll get a 30% discount. I've put the code and the link to the series in the chat as the first item sent to everyone for your convenience, so you don't need to worry if you weren't able to write down what I just said. We also encourage you to shop at local independent bookstores in these tough times. I've shared links in the chat to Dog Ear Books in Russellville, Arkansas, and Novel in Memphis, Tennessee, the nearby indies which have supported University Press of Mississippi and tonight's 2 authors. Now, let me introduce the editor of UPM's Race, Rhetoric, and Media series, Davis W. Houck, and he will tell us a little bit about the series and then introduce our 2 authors. Davis W. Houck is the Fannie Lou Hamer Professor of Rhetorical Studies at Florida State University, where he's taught for the past 21 years. The author and editor of 12 books, Houck is the founder of the Emmett Till Archives at Florida State University. He's also a founding member of FSU's Civil Rights Institute and a founding member of the Emmett Till Memory Project. A former board chairman of the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Big Bend, Houck was an active volunteer at the Mikosuke Club for more than 7 years. His most recent book project is titled, "What Are These Bodies Doing in the River? Searching for Freedom Summer." UPM is delighted to have the book under contract, and we're always looking for the next great book in this series. The series page on our website includes information about how to submit a project for consideration, and you'll find that series page in the chat. Davis, it's so great to see you. Please, let's begin.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate you inviting me to be a part of the conversation tonight. And I do want to say just a few words about the Race, Rhetoric, and Media series. The person who is most responsible for this series is not me. The person who's most responsible for this series is the former director by the name of Sita Srinivasan. And I just wanted to tell a little bit about her story because I think it's so important to our conversation tonight, because without her, this series and this conversation doesn't happen. In 2008, I had just published a book with the University Press of Mississippi on Emmett Till and the Mississippi Press. And I figured that was going to be the end of my relationship with the press. It was a nice relationship. The editing team was great. it was just seamless the whole way through. The book came out in February, and not long thereafter, I got an email from Sita asking if I would be interested in proposing a new series on race, rhetoric, and media with the press. And I was humbled and honored, and I said, why, certainly. I would love to create that opportunity. And not long thereafter, in 2010, the press gave a thumbs up, and 21 books later, here we are. Back in 2000, I believe I was checking the website today. Our first book was Keith Miller's book on Martin Luther King in 2011, and we got some new books coming out very soon. And two of our most talented authors are with us tonight, Dr. Andre Johnson and Dr. Lisa Corrigan. One last thing before I introduce them tonight. I think University Press of Mississippi is the only university press on the planet with a 6-part miniseries that's going to show up on ABC this year. And what I'm talking about is Devery Anderson's book, which is on Emmett Till, and in our series, Race, Rhetoric, and Media, was optioned by Will Smith and Jay-Z. And filming in Greenwood starts in January. And so we are tickled about that book and about Devery's project and the fact that it is a University Press of Mississippi book. So that's what's on tap for us. Let me introduce our two authors tonight. Dr. Andre Johnson is a PhD from the University of Memphis and an associate professor of communication and scholar in residence at the Benjamin L. Hooks Institute for Social Change at the University of Memphis. He was also recently named the 2020 Scholar of the Year from the Religious Communication Association. His books, The Forgotten Prophet, Bishop Henry McNeil Turner, and The African American Prophetic Tradition, was published with Lexington Books in 2012. And The Struggle Over Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter with Lexington Books in 2018 with Amanda Nell Edgar. Were recipients of the 2013 and 2019 African American Communication and Culture Division Outstanding Book Award from the National Communication Association. His latest book, just released, is titled No Future in the Country, The Prophetic Pessimism of Bishop Henry McNeil Turner. And that, of course, is with the University Press of Mississippi, just out a couple weeks ago. He is currently working on a book of speeches that highlight the oratory of Bishop Turner and a religious biography as well. Also, as a scholar activist, it is not uncommon to see Andre leading, organizing, and participating in protests, vigils, marches, boycotts, and other direct social actions. As senior pastor of Gifts of Life Ministries, his faith has led him to take part in efforts to reform our prison system. Economic and poverty issues such as Fight for 15 and living wage initiatives, police misconduct and brutality issues, and other issues surrounding race. He was also one of the lead architects in Take 'Em Down 901, the successful effort to remove Confederate statues in the city of Memphis. Dr. Johnson, welcome tonight.
Thank you.
Our second participant tonight is Dr. Lisa Corgan, who got her PhD from the University of Maryland. She is professor of communication and director of the Gender Studies program at the University of Arkansas. Her first book, Prison Power, How Prison Politics Influenced the Movement for Black Liberation, was published by the University Press of Mississippi in 2016, is the recipient of the 2017 Diamond Anniversary Book Award and the 2017 African American Communication and Culture Division Outstanding Book Award, both from the National Communication Association. Her second book was just released and is titled Black Feelings, Race and Affect in the Long 60s, which has just been out several months now with the University Press of Mississippi. She is currently working on a book about political and racial intimacies. She also co-hosts a popular podcast with Laura Wiederhaft called Lean Back, Critical Feminist Conversations. And she works as a political consultant for campaigns, candidates, and grassroots organizations in Arkansas and around the country. She is a co-founder of Arkansas Against Guns on Campus and Arkansans for Safe Public Schools. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks, Davis.
I'm going to turn it over to you two.
And thanks for those lovely introductions. Thanks, Steve, for helping us organize this author chat. Andre, thanks for being here. I'm happy to see you again. I'm glad we could just spend time together. It's virtual. Well,
Thank you.
I reached out to Andre because both of us had books coming out from the same press and the same series, and I'm just such a huge fan of Andre and his work, and we've collaborated on many things for many years. And I wanted an opportunity to talk with him about this new book. So, Andre, I have a couple questions for you
I
about the new
know.
book, and I hope we can have a chat about this moment and, you know, and the kinds of things that we're writing about. But I've never really asked you, like, how did you settle on Bishop Henry McNeil Turner as a subject of study? What was it about his orations and writings that drew you in? Because, I mean, there's no doubt he lived a fascinating life, and the dude was totally prolific. Was it his biography? Like, how did you get to him?
That's a great question. Right before a seminar in grad school, I ran across his September 3rd, 1868 speech, where he is delivering this prophetic denunciation of the state house in the state of Georgia, because they had just voted, well, it was on the floor actually, to expel all of the black members who just got elected. And so everybody that went before him was trying to appeal to the magnanimity of the body. And Turner was like, bump that. I mean, you're going to do what you're going to do. And he just, in today's parlance, just slayed. And I was like, wow, where is this speech? I don't know anything about this guy, this speech. And it just spoke to me. And that was my first introduction. Never heard of him. Of course, I've heard of the AME Church, but when I started to look at his life and the things that he did and the first that he did and all of that, it was just a fascinating figure. And I just knew either one or two things had to be true. Either A, that it was just so much work done on this person I just never heard of, that it would not make for an interesting dissertation. Or if there wasn't any work, well, 19th century like preacher, extemporaneous speaker, no text to examine, all of that. Imagine my surprise to see all of these just abundance of text. I had to actually decide what, I couldn't use them all. But one of the things that I did promise to do was to continue to work on Bishop, and I will continue to work on Bishop Turner for the rest of my career. He's just that prolific. And so when I began to dig in, and the more and more I digged in, the more and more I saw him, I placed him within the prophetic tradition of the Black oratorical and prophetic tradition. And here we are. I mean, you know, I'm working on, like Davis mentioned, beginning to work on a spiritual biography of Turner, and working on speeches and stuff. So it is just so much. So, but that's how I ran across that speech somewhere. I can't even remember. It was online. It was right when we were about to start our one of those graduate seminar, pro seminar classes. And I said, oh, this is the figure that I want to study. And I've been with Bishop Turner ever since. That was back in 2005, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. Well, I mean, we had a conversation, for those of you who weren't there, about James Cone at the end of the week on Saturday. And when we were talking about Cone, I was thinking about all of your work about Turner, because they seem like soul brothers, you know, like in such similar ways. They're both, you know, adopting prophetic persona, but they also are pessimists. So do you think that, like, do all folks in the pulpit take on the prophetic persona? What is it about Turner? I mean, he's writing at the end of the Civil War, and that was kind of a bad news situation, right? I mean, like, a lot of people died. It was pretty brutal. Reconstruction was a disaster, obviously. Do you think, what is it about it that creates opportunities and constraints, the prophetic persona? What does it give us?
Right, yeah. That's good. I think with the prophetic persona, especially within the Black tradition, and let me just locate it there first. I think within the Black tradition, and I got this fancy definition of the African-American prophetic tradition, birth out of slavery, born in the Jim and Jane Crow America, and I go on like a little nice paragraph. But basically, what it does is give voice to a lot of issues and problems that many in the community would like to articulate, but either can't or don't know how or just cannot get the hearing. These people, what prophets do, and this is another misunderstanding about prophets and prophecy and all of this. A lot of people think that prophets are these isolated figures by themselves, go to the mountaintop, grab what God has or the divine has poured into them, and they come back down. No, prophets are part of the community. Prophets do their best work with this whole piece that's coming out a little bit later, hopefully, and hopefully soon, that I work on prophetic listening, the listening piece, listening to the community's concerns, and then articulating them in a woe unto you manner, you know, to the power structures. And so what Turner does, and the first book, I traced his oratory as an optimistic prophet in 1866. Let us, you know, Civil War, it has been, it's over. Union won. Let us, bygones be bygones. Let us love our brothers and sisters. Let us all unite together. You know, the nice rhetoric that, you know, hey, we can come to work together. But by 1895, he's like, there's no manhood or personhood future in the United States for the Negro. So that was my whole thing. I'm like, how do you move from let us be brothers and sisters and, you know, and eventually hell is an improvement as far as the Negro is concerned. That's chapter 6 of the book, by the way. It is just awesome. He is slaying everybody. But the point is that I wanted to know, how do you move from that? And within the Black prophetic tradition, that is something that's a constant, because I'm started looking at Richard Allen, Du Bois, King. I mean, these figures, and all of a sudden, the people that we, you know, say that adopt these prophetic personas, they move from this optimistic frame to a pessimistic one. So, and that's what Turner does. But in the meantime, giving voice, empowering people to see themselves as humans, to see and to reclaim their own agency. His whole Back Africa movement was a failure if you're looking at, did millions of Black people go to Africa? But it was a huge success in creating this, what Terrell calls this symbolic emancipation, in which Black folk in the South said, you know what, I don't have enough money to get to Africa, but I can go as far as my money would take me. So if I'm in Louisiana, I get to Mississippi. If I'm in Mississippi, I get to Memphis and Beale Street. If I'm in Memphis, I go to Chicago. I mean, as far as I could go, people were leaving the South in droves. Yeah. And so I talk about that in the book in chapter 5, that Turner's rhetoric produced this agency for Black people to say, yeah, wait, we don't really have to take this. We can just leave, break contracts, because that's when, you know, the planners did, try to locate them in the South and just move on, and to try to carve out the best life that you possibly can carve out.
Well, it's interesting because you and I both write about hope and disappointment in these books, you know? And I think that's not a surprise to anybody who does critical race work, or certainly Black historiography at all, right? I mean,
right.
Both of those things are about, like, is there a future for the movement? Do things get better or not? And so I think it makes sense that in the Black prophetic tradition, there's a slide from hope to disappointment and to pessimism as an understanding about how, you know, uncommitted white America has been to, in the case of Turner, the plight of the Negro, and in my work in the 60s, to Black America. You know, it makes sense that there's continuity there.
I was so fascinated by reading your work and just seeing so many similarities from the 19th century. You know, you're in the 20th and in the 60s, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the continuum. This is what, you know, this is actually what Turner is talking about. His famous, you know, debate, he and Booker T. Washington were friends, but they had these kind of terse debates and stuff. And Washington bailed them out a lot of times, you know, especially when he was going to be brought up on treason charges in 1906. But, you know, that's another story. But Washington was like, let us just, live our life. We'll be over here. We won't vote. We won't do anything. We're just going to, save our money, work hard, and just leave us alone. And Turner's like, leave us alone. That's an impossibility for white people to leave us alone. They would never leave us alone. And so this whole notion of even if you did what people said that you should do in order to not be lynched, all of this stuff you are writing about in the 60s, and you were talking, and I remember reading in some of the pages of your book is where Black Power advocates and people who were looking at, King's death and X's death and Kennedy's death, all in this kind of pessimistic note, no, we tried that. We need something else. And so I would like to just ask you a question about that period. What made that period so fascinating to you? And of course, I know your work, and I want to open up a conversation about, how did you come to this work? So let me just do that first. Let me start at the beginning. Oh, Black feelings. Come on now. What drew you to Black feelings?
Well, I write about prison stuff, right? And so the first book, Prison Power, that UPM published, was about prison memoirs of the Black liberation movement. And I talk a lot about how prison is an essential space for theorizing Black agency and resistance to white state power and white supremacy. But when I sent that manuscript out, a bunch of the reviews that it got were from white reviewers who called Black power activists petulant and childish, and they argued that Black power and civil rights movement never really achieved anything major and we shouldn't write about them. And so I thought a lot about what it was about Black power that brought out all of these like super negative white feelings. And then I went back and looked and I thought, oh yeah, these white feelings are continuous. These are always the complaints of white people about Black mass politics, regardless of their orientation. And so I just started noticing all of these constellations about emotions. And in the case of the white speakers, whether they were politicians or whatever, they would just dismiss social movements as constellations of feelings, even though they were producing white rage, like segregation now, segregation forever, right? Mass resistance of anti-civil rights, anti-desegregationists in the South, like led by George Wallace and other men like him, that was all feelings. That was all sad, I call it sad mad whiteness, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like sad about the loss of privilege and angry about the infiltration of Black bodies into white spaces. So I wanted to write about how policies influence feelings and how feelings produce public policies, because I think that's a lot of where the race conversation has been really since, Turner and before Turner, right. It's a lot of affective language about what it means to feel and to think and who gets to do one or both.
Right. And I think that spoke to me because going back to Turner, I think Turner, you giving me language and ideas about Turner and read my own reinterpretation of how I understand Turner. I go back now and read some of those writings and some of his speeches, and he's doing that work too. He's talking about, feelings and emotion, but then he switches hard and just like basically saying, but I understand that you don't care about any of this. White America, you don't care about any of this. So, so his argument was that, hey, we need to reclaim our collective agency and uproot and move out. His whole argument about, whether we should fight, thought it was dumb because he said, hey, Black Americans, no, we'll lose and real quick. They have all the guns. We don't have enough guns. To acquiesce, no, don't do that because you're going to pass on that degradation on to your children's children forever. And no, don't do that. What about immigrants? Like Du Bois began to start talking about later on, and he's like, no, you can't do that. The only thing left is just to not participate in your oppression and leave. And so he began to start talking about, of course, immigration. When he realized that wasn't going to happen because of the money situation and all of that, it's within that immigrationist rhetoric that he begins to start doing what you're talking about in your book, Lisa, about start naming these feelings and how people were feeling, how the emotions, were happening. And no matter if you were nice, no matter if you were mean, no matter if you were whatever, nothing was going to change. Nothing was going to happen. Lynchings went unabated. The chain gangs got longer, and prison, what we now know as the prison industrial complex, is birthed out of the late 19th, early 20th century time frame.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's the prophetic persona and Black power are very similar adaptations or responses to the failure of white liberals to secure equity and justice in America, right? So,
Right.
And just like you're saying, like especially after the assassination of Kennedy, between 63 and the assassination of King in 68, there's all this ambivalence about whether or not it's worthwhile to work with white liberals, like whether it's LBJ or even white liberals in the States. And once King is murdered, the death of nonviolence became the death of the civil rights movement as it was led by King. And the Black power activists had nowhere to go because they were shut out of any kind of relationship with the executive branch of the government. And Congress had turned against them with a bunch of law and order, policies that criminalized them and criminalized their mobility and undermined their ability to organize. And so they became interested in localizing the civil rights struggle into their own communities through survival programs and things that uplifted Black communities, because the federal government refused to continue producing any kind of gains in terms of justice or equality, and went the opposite direction, right, to basically destroy and eradicate civil rights organizing. So there is a sense that the failure of Reconstruction, especially in the 1890s, right, when there's a huge prolific push by Turner, and then the end of the 60s and early 70s when, the counterintelligence programs of the FBI is like destroying Black power and civil rights, those are very similar, and as rhetoricians we call them recursive moments, right? They ebb and flow, they return in the same way, the language is the same. So I think that there's a lot to be learned about Turner and his pessimism and his prophetic persona moving forward in time, and also things to be learned about, the affective and emotional politics of the civil rights and Black power movements going backward in time. I think that they are very much in conversation together. But as I think about your work, I'm thinking you are also prolific. And so I want to talk a little bit about like the writing and publication process for you. Do you like writing and editing books? Is it something that you enjoy?
I do.
Yeah?
I do.
It's my favorite thing. If I never wrote another journal article as long as I lived, I'd be so happy to just write books forever.
Yes, I have. I've tried to now do a couple of more journal articles and stuff, but I was a book person from like day one. I mean, and so writing the book became, and it was my mentor, again, Dr. Barbara Holmes at Memphis Theological Seminary, talked about, scholarship and helped me with understanding, trying to find my place in the field and all of that. And she's not, of course, she's a Christian ethicist. She's not rhetorician or rhetoric by any stretch of imagination, even though she did do a wonderful work on her dissertation on Barbara Jordan using Burke's analysis on some of her speeches. Right. And
that's
then
hilarious. I love it.
Right. So, but I do. I mean, I love it. I mean, I love to get into what I call a writing groove, a research groove. Now, that's what I really like to do. I really just love to, it would be great if I could just get to the archives or just read 19th century stuff. If I could just do that and get paid and pay the bills, that'll be okay.
I hear that. But also, it seems like you had good mentors.
Yeah, wonderful.
Can you talk a little bit about
Yeah.
about both being mentored and that process, and then mentoring others? Because I know that it's really important to you, and it's one of the things I love about you.
Yeah, I think, you know, being a pastor and doing the community work that I do, you know, relationships, friendships, mentoring, all of that is just naturally important. But for me, Barbara Holmes is a mentor. She was the first one. I talked a little bit about this in my acceptance speech for the Scholar of the Year Award at RCA, and I you know, named some folk. Barbara Holmes was the first person, for instance, when I was in seminary and taking a class from her, who told me I could do PhD work. That PhD, Lisa, is not even on the horizon for me. I'm not even thinking. I'm just trying to do an MD or go past the church and, you know, maybe, you know, try to go out in the streets and protest. But that was earth shattering for me that I could do that. So I did. John Campbell was another person in the field, huge in the field, who saw potential in me and nurtured and guided me. And then, of course, Mike Leff, my advisor, who introduced me to all of the folk, of course, that he knew in the field. And unbeknownst to me, was bragging on me behind my back, you know, to other people, like, watch out for him. You know, he's got something here. You know, he's still trying to figure it all out. But once he gets it done, he's gonna, you know, do these things. And then, you know, I you know, joined NCA and got with the African American Comm and Culture Division. Jamel Bell was the first person I met at NCA back in 2005, and the rest, as they say, is history. You know, Ron Jackson, all of these folk played a role in my life and in my scholarship and in my work. But I would be remiss if I did not say that my church family, my wife, Lisa, who's also named Lisa, Lisa, and the many, many women and men in the activist movement that have been mentors to me, indirectly as well as directly. So I just had a whole lot of them. I try to keep them all together because I am not here by myself. I am not here by myself, and I know that. What about you? What about your mentors? What about your writing style? What are you?
I mean, it's hard. I mean, on the one hand, I feel like I'm kind of unmentorable. You know, I showed up at 21 in grad school and was like, I'm going to write about Farrakhan. And everybody's like, this will pass. And I'm like, I really think it will not. And so, you know, I think they did the best that they could. But I mean, there were no people of color that taught in my grad program. I took no classwork in rhetoric and race. It was not offered when I was a student. I had Black mentors outside of comm, like that I took classes from, but of course they were busy being on every diversity thing and mentoring students of color. So I didn't really ask them for a lot because it seemed like ridiculous. So I feel self-taught as an academic who does race work. But I would say that since I got to Arkansas, that has changed because I do so much community activism. And so you know, there's a judge in Little Rock, Judge Wendell Griffin, that I work a lot with, who does prison stuff and education stuff. And there was a representative in our state legislature, John Walker, who has been a civil rights lawyer. He just passed last year for, 70 years. And I did a lot of work with him. And, you know, I think for me, it's been only recently that there have been more mentors of color that I'm collaborating with, but you know, I hated to take up that kind of space. So I just sort of forged my way and was willing to eat shit if I was wrong because I was out there by myself. And even when I went up for like promotion, even when I went up for promotion to full professor, there's so few people of color or critical race scholars that are full professors that there weren't even people to write letters for me. So, you know, I think that in some ways, I both benefited from the lack of mentorship because I took a bunch of risks, and also obviously, would have preferred to be able to collaborate and learn with and from critical race scholars, instead of just going it alone. So my relationship with mentoring is, I think, far more complex. It's not as I don't know, easy to describe.
I do understand that, and I hear you on that, because and maybe it is one of the reasons why I try my best to avail myself to be a mentor, right? So I mean, I'm not, you're only a mentor if someone wants you to be. So I'm not going to claim that I'm a mentor, but if someone wants mentorship and they think that I might be a mentor, I am going to avail myself. And so far, especially since I arrived back at the University of Memphis as a professor in the department, I have talked with and engaged with and been on the phone with and met with and had coffees and lunch with many different students. And some of them have decided to come to the University of Memphis and to do work in rhetoric and race, some in rhetoric, race, and religion. So, and and I think back to my earlier days with Barbara Holmes telling me the only thing she wanted me to do, how can I pay you back for your mentorship? You just pay it forward. You go out now. You just do. And so I have tried to do that every step of the way.
I think for me, people were worried. I mean, they were sort of worried and also concern trolling, right? So nobody wanted me to write my dissertation on the prison memoirs of the Black Liberation Movement. And the implied message was like, you can't get a job. And I'm like, why? And they wouldn't say, but of course the unspoken thing was because you're not Black. But then they were all presidential scholars. And I'm like, I don't remember when you were president. When were you elected president? Did I miss that period of your life? I'm like, standpoint, is only so useful. Right. It's a terrible argument. Like, the identity politics is only, like, the identity piece is just a trash argument. So I think pretty much everybody's surprised that I'm still here and writing a bunch of books and doing the kind of work that I'm doing, except that I had always been an activist first, and so for me, that my academic perspective was always grounded in the community. I just assumed I wouldn't get a job. They told me I wouldn't, and I just figured, okay, well, I'll just keep doing politics and keep doing community stuff. And so, here we are, and I sort of moonlight as a professor, and then I have this whole other life as a
I understand that as well, because because I really got into this after, I finished the PhD. I was just saying to myself, look, I'm a pastor. I do this. If I can teach, if I can adjunct a couple of places, or maybe become an instructor somewhere, that'll be cool. I never did think about the professionalization, if you will, of the professorate, moving on up. But then I began to understand why that's important. Why we need a Lisa Corgan as a full professor.
I'm here writing these letters. So I feel that way too.
Right. I mean, I began to understand, wait a minute, now I need to be, so last year when I received tenure and stuff, I immediately just announced, to let everybody know. Now I'm working my way to full now. I'm just let everybody know. So don't be surprised. So I want to try to, do that, because I think that now I see where that is important and just to have, and just others can see that it can, be done. And then you can do the work. And that's the other thing my mentors were telling me, because I was at a point, you got to imagine, I'm over here in comm. I'm over here in religious studies, and I was trying to thread this needle. My book is not too. It's too light on rhetoric. It's too much on the religion, and it's not religion enough. It's too much. I mean, so I got to thread this needle, and I remember people telling me, "No, you are creating a path. and for others to follow. And wow, I mean, when I began to look at it like that and try to, you just keep doing the work. Put your head down. You just do the work and just let it and put it out there. Let folk know. And it's so no one can say, well, Johnson, he's not doing it. No, here it is. Boom, boom, boom. And so that's what I want to continue to do because it's fun. Writing is hard. It's hard. It's hard work and all of that. But I do enjoy it. And I just like getting these ideas out and stuff that I've been thinking about, stuff I've been musing about, trying to get them out in some kind of order and allowing people to read, and hopefully they like it. And if not, then make a good critique so I can write another book on your critique. We can go back and forth. We can be in a rap battle.
I think for me, I just found rhetoric to be so small as a discipline.
Wow.
It wasn't.
And I think the opposite, though. I think it's huge. I think we can do anything.
Yeah.
But I know what you're saying. Go ahead.
You know what I'm saying, though.
Right.
So I think for me, I'm just like, build the thing you want to see. I'm like, okay. And there was just like, there's Corrigan over there doing her Corgan thing.
Right.
So it's nice to hear that you found folks that wanted to support you. And I'm thinking a lot about, both of us are activist scholars. And for me, I feel like it's essential for race scholars to be activists. I actually think that it's an ethical imperative. But I'm curious because you and I occupy this sort of different space in academia as having all of this, external life that's public facing and that's about doing justice work in our communities. What would you tell scholars who want to become activists about the relationship between activism and scholarship and teaching and mentoring and the rest of it? What would you tell them if they were like, I kind of want to do that? How do I do that?
Right. I've been asked this a lot, and sometimes my answer is not like 100% like supporting and like you get fired up, because I really want to be truthful about this thing. I come to the activism piece because of my faith. So if I was a professor, not a professor, I would still been out in the street. So that's, for me, it's easy. And I see the connection. There is no separation between sacred and secular. Everything is meshed together. I see it, and it's just who I am. I have been at NCA, and there have been some people on a picket line, and I have joined them. And I have, taken time out from the conference to go out and be with the people. So that's just who I am. That's just me. But for people who are feeling now this pull, I always tell you, count the cost, because there is a risk involved. And I never thought that somebody like me could be the activist guy, but not do the scholarship piece. Like, coming close up to tenure, and I'm struggling to try to get a piece out and stuff. Now, I'm not saying this would have happened, but I just had it in the back of my mind that if I didn't do the scholarship piece, that would be the easy way to say, hey, we gave you a shot and you didn't make it, so, off with you. I also wanted to do the work, but the work is informed, the activism is informing the scholarship, and it becomes a little bit easier. So I'm talking about prophetic rhetoric. I'm talking about a Black preacher. I'm talking about his sermons and his writings and how he adopted a prophetic persona in public and how he spoke truth to power in public. Well, I attempt to do that. I have done that. Other folk here in the city of Memphis have done that. This is what we do, and then we can come back and I can think about, now let me, think about this a little deeper now and maybe write about it. The last one of my most recent pieces was that's in Nathan Crick's Rhetoric of Social Movements. I talked about the shutdown of the I-40 bridge, the bridge, and you well know it, connects Arkansas and Tennessee. And back in July 10th, 2016, activists, about 1,000 of them, shut down the bridge. And I was on the bridge and then came off the bridge and participated in the march downtown. I thought that would be a good piece to write about. So I talked about it, and I talked about the reporting that was done about the protest, as well as my own feelings, Black feelings again, right? You hear my own feelings about the protest and how, so it's piece of rhetorical criticism and autoethnography all kind of merged in together. But I just see that as a natural fit. So I would just tell everybody, listen, depending on the action that you take, there is a risk involved in all types of protests. So, you might want to start off with just a soft action, standing on a street corner with a sign, not saying anything, before you go out in the middle of the night and break curfew because you think that an injustice is happening. And part of direct social action is that you willingly, openly break the law. You willingly, openly break the law, and you are willing to take the consequences for that. That may mean jail, fines, or whatever, tear gas, mace, rubber bullets, all of that, because you are standing up and you're bearing witness. That's a high ethical standard, and I just tell everybody to think about it before you jump out there, and before you get involved in a whole lot of other stuff that might, people might come after you, especially with academics. They really do. If you, get into the wrong group, folk will start, tagging you, emailing your dean, emailing your chair, and all of that. So. What about you? You are really, you're just not active. You're active, especially on the political front. You're doing wonderful work trying to talk to, educate, lead, push, cajole, yell at folk in Arkansas to understand politics and understand power, understand agency, but also to understand how to leverage power. So talk a little bit about that. How do you find the time to do your scholarship, but also to be on the ground in real time, tweeting, trying to get laws changed, trying to get laws passed? What's up with that?
I started working in politics when I was 15. And so I've been doing this for 25 years. But I didn't know that when I moved from DC to Arkansas, that there would be such a vacuum, right? The South, at least in Arkansas, we are struggling because there's brain drain out of the South. And so I came in with all this energy and all of this information and all this experience from other places, including DC. And so pretty early on, people came to me wanting to explain things and teach things and help write legislation and help run campaigns. And then our legislature flipped red for the first time since the telephone had been invented. So in like 130 years. And so all hell broke loose and somebody had to talk about what was happening and what to expect and how to stop it. Nobody else had the skills. And then I was willing to take the risk because I was young and I had nothing to lose. And so it, just like you, it informed my scholarship, and I have been able to build a kind of praxis where the university work helps create space to talk about power with all different kinds of publics, and then the political stuff influences all of the things that I write about movements and and how politics works. So I think I probably do more activist political stuff than I do academic stuff, in some ways, even though they inform each other, because the politics is consuming to me in a way that the academic lifestyle is not. Right. And so I find a lot of ethical satisfaction in doing the politics in a way where the academic stuff is in part just my job, even though I love writing the books. Right. The rest of the job is just sort of a job. So, you know, I love the activism. I think it's really important, and it's what it makes me feel alive and part of a community. And, you know, I think as a white chick who does critical race work, it's important to be out in the streets and changing the laws and pressuring the governors and, you know, making the moves, especially when I'm the white person in the room at the table, you know.
And have you always, I mean, if you just look back over just your life, have you always felt this way? Is this, is this something that was just like, hey,
I think you call it a calling.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Yeah, all right.
I have that. I'm a heathen, but I have the calling. You know,
we're still working with you, Lisa. It's not too late, sister.
It's okay. I have the spirit. I'm just using it to other ends.
No,
I'm with you 100%.
Listen, if you're a heathen, I want to hang around more heathens like that. Man. I'll tell you too. Because I know some folk who claim to be Christians that I don't want to have anything to do with, but that's another Zoom.
And back to you, Davis.
All right.
Fabulous. Great transition. We do have a question, and it's a really good one. I think it's from our friend Brandon Irby. Can both of you talk a bit more about the significance and relevance of your historical projects to our contemporary socio-political moment? Any key moments in your books that you think are particularly relevant to our current times and how we navigate anti-Black racism in our society?
I'm gonna let you take that one, Lisa, because I think your book is just right. I mean, you just changed a couple of dates and people and markers. Your book will speak, just so poignantly to today. But
I mean, my favorite chapter to write was the chapter on riots and rioting, because white people deliberately misread rioting as temper tantrums or as anti-whiteness, when really, you know, urban rebellion happens when all of the political means have already been exhausted because Black people have been cut out of political processes. So certainly in the wake of George Floyd's murder, you know, we saw urban rebellion across the country, and obviously white people wanted to think about how to interpret it. But I mean, you know, urban rebellion is a thing that's as old as the nation is, actually. And so, you know, I think Black feelings speaks to what happens when the feelings hit such a fevered pitch because, you know, U.S. public policy is so radically anti-Black and is so focused on eradicating Black people that the emotions run high because needs are not met. And I think, you know, and a democracy meets the needs of its citizens, its emotional, social, political needs. And insofar as we pretend to be a democracy, then that means feeding and clothing and making sure they have fresh water and providing jobs and wages and equitable housing and, you know, and police who don't shoot them for sport. So, you know, I think for me, Black feelings is in some ways, Andre, I hope that it's not timeless. Right. I hope that there's a point where, you know, feelings and public policy are not in this cage match that's fundamentally anti-Black. But insofar as people want to think about how public policy is framed around feelings and about how feelings are evoked as a way to change public policy, I think, you know, understanding BLM, for example, is a process of understanding, you know, why there are such intense feelings about extrajudicial police executions of unarmed citizens. So, and, you know, for you, Andre, certainly it seems to me that, you know, thinking about prophecy, but also pessimism as a political, you know, orientation in the pulpit, but in the Black community more general, you know, in the language of Black leaders is also, you know, a historical continuity in American public life.
Listen, my sermon Sunday is going to be Is God an Uncle Ruckus? And so as we start,
so you bury the lead. Is that what you're saying? The lead
so you're talking about pessimism in the pulpit and stuff, and I make a direct connection back to Turner. I'm reading your book, and I'm like, my God, Turner is fighting the same stuff when we talk about. I mean, the chapters in No Future lends itself to the present moment. Chapter 1 is about Plessy v. Ferguson. that Supreme Court decision in which he called the Supreme Court an abominable conclave of Negro hating demons, right? One of my favorite phrases ever. And move to chapter 2, the whole God is a Negro, Black theology. Chapter 3, anti-war. Chapter 4, electoral politics, where he switches allegiance from the Republican to the Democrat. Chapter 5, immigration, and then Hell is an Improvement, chapter 6, as far as the Negro is concerned, when he's talking about race in such a 20th century, mid-20th century, early 21st century way. And he is making these connections about anti-Black. He doesn't have the language yet, but he is moving away from just the language of prejudice that was big in early 20th, and he's getting to the real issue. No, it's Blackness. It's Blackness around the globe, because Turner was afforded an opportunity to travel, and he sees this around the world now. He's beginning to understand, look, this is a thing here. And he doesn't say, like Afro-pessimism, he doesn't use anti-Blackness, but he is talking about how white folk really articulate, talking about the media. Oh my God, the newspapers were the media of the day, right? So he's analyzing how white people are talking about Black folk in the newspapers and stuff. So any one of those historical moments that I just named in those 6 chapters fits, I think, the current day, especially as a Supreme Court, especially when this present day makeup of the Supreme Court make their first major ruling. I'm just going to go back to Turner. You'll see me on social media posting up Turner quotes again about the Supreme Court. So,
Andre, could I ask you a question?
Yeah, David.
And Lisa, I think this probably addresses some of your work as well. But one of my challenges in studying somebody like a Fannie Lou Hamer is getting access to her materials, whatever those materials are: speeches, letters, drafts of whatever, audio, video. It's so little of it survives. And so I'm wondering, with somebody like Turner, did he have a strong sense of himself as, this is going to survive and I'm going to make sure this material survives, so that a guy like Andre Johnson's going to come back here and find it?
No, sadly, I don't think he had. He always talked about writing an autobiography. People were begging him to do it, but he was so busy doing the work. And that's another thing that a lot of activists get caught up in. I'm having this, Davis, here in Memphis with some of the civil rights preachers here in Memphis who are getting up in age, who are, getting older, who are stepping down, who are retiring. I'm trying to get them to write something, or let me interview you, let me record, let me do something about it. But they're still active. They're still so busy doing the work, going to meetings and trying to, do all of those type of things. So Turner never, and the sad part about it is that there was no archive of Turner's, nobody, and I talk about this in the book as well, that nobody thought enough to say, hey, we might want to collect all of these writings. It was only when I started to go to the Christian Recorder newspapers and some of the Black-owned newspapers of the 19th century, where I saw this H.M. Turner, Reverend Turner, Henry McNeil Turner bylines all over. I mean, it was just like everywhere. This guy was so huge in its day. 25,000 people showed up at his funeral in Atlanta when they brought his body back from Canada. He dies in Ottawa, Canada in 1915. But I mean, he was loved, especially from the Black people in the South, who he claimed to represent. The sharecroppers, the people, and he's doing all this bold talking. And that's another thing, going back to the very first question you asked, Lisa. He does his bold talking in the South. He never moves. He stays, and when he gets his home in Atlanta, he stays in Atlanta to his death date. And of course, he could have gone to Africa, could have been the bishop there, could have gone up north, could have gone somewhere where he could have had some maybe relief. But he stayed right there because as a prophet, again, you stay with the people. The people, you stay with them. You take the indignities as well. So, but no, I don't think he had a sense at all. And I wish he had finished his all. I think it would have been a fascinating work.
And so, Andre, you've actually been piecing that together then, kind of his own.
Yes, that's what I've been collecting, the Digital Humanities Project, the volumes, the speeches that I have been saving for a book project that I'm working on right now. The extant speeches that I have found. So his political speeches, some of the platform speeches, you know, he briefly joins the Prohibition Party and gives this wonderful speech in 1887 in Texas. So powerful that they run him out of Texas. You're like, you know, you got to go, you know, so yeah, I think I got, you know, close to 1,100 pieces of writing, you know, if I add them all up.
Wow.
And that was my first job coming out real quick, 2008. You know what happened in 2008? Economic turn down, no jobs anywhere. And I'm getting ready to go out on the market like everybody else. And then Barbara Holmes again at Memphis had this research fellow position for me at Memphis Theological Seminary. And it allowed me to stay at home. And I said, I can do this for a year. It was a 1-year position, like a postdoc. I can stay here, you know, and it was in that year, me and the library and the librarians and the microfiche machine became real good friends, because that's all I did that whole year, just collected all those writings.
That's awesome. That's such an enormous service to our field and the people who are going to come after you. Lisa, are there any texts that you wish you could access that are gone, or stuff that's like, wow, I wish I was there to record that, or any frustrations, any moments of this stuff just doesn't survive and I wish it did?
Not for this book, because so many people had so much anti-Black stuff to say, and it all got preserved and regurgitated for 40 years after the fact. So the white speech is all super well preserved because the state was producing it, you know. I think, you know, Huey did a pretty good job. Huey Newton did a pretty good job of understanding his own role as an archivist. And, you know, the issues with Malcolm, although it looks like so much more of his stuff is going to become available now. So I didn't, not with this book, I didn't have the same archival files. Yeah, everybody was writing about riots all day long everywhere. So
interesting. Got you.
It was a tremendous amount of information that was available.
There's a question that I want to read over in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. It's an extended one. The historic periods between Reconstruction and the 1970s, in retrospect, Black perspective seems so much more well-defined and related, even coherent, than the periods that followed, which are more insistently hopeful and trending towards symbolism. It seems we Black people have moved from the pessimism of both the periods you cover to resignation.
Oh.
I'll take that, Craig. It's nice to have you here. If you don't know Craig on the Facebook, Craig's profile picture on Facebook is Fred Hampton, which obviously I'm down with. You know, so the thing that happens in the 70s is that all the leaders are assassinated, and so the country as a whole, both about Black liberation struggles specifically, but also about social movements more generally, collapses from political economy into representation because of the mass murder of leaders, but also because of mass media and hyper-corporatization of social movement icons. And so movements stop doing political economy and thinking about money and power and Marxism, and they start producing capital so you can wear your Che Guevara t-shirt, right, to the rally. So the coherence, I think, Nancy Fraser, who's a feminist materialist historian, writes a lot about this, I think, brilliantly. So I don't want to regurgitate her work except to say that she's right that, you know, Reagan basically shits all over, you know, socialism and social welfare. And so that ends, you know, social movements' engagement with Marxism and redistribution of capital. Instead, they are directed and their energy is directed towards representation. Pick, you know, the Benetton ads or art or, you know, music. Those are places where expression of social activism is taken up because people stop, you know, thinking about Marx.
Got it.
Question here also, does either of your books speak on the Black Lives Matter movements across America?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa. You talk.
Well, I mean, Andre wrote another book about BLM and All Lives Matter. That's fantastic. And, you know, certainly, do you talk, I don't know that you talk about BLM with Turner though, do you?
No, I don't. I think in the conclusion, I mentioned it maybe at the near the end, but yeah.
And
But you make the.
Yeah, mine does. I talk a lot about the Obama administration and colorblindness and how Obama takes up Kennedy's colorblind language of hope and optimism. And so hope and change become the memes of the Obama administration in a way that really allows white nationalist emotions to run high, both as a response to his presidency, but also as a response to his reinvigorated Kennedy-esque liberalism. And so I talk a lot about what happens in the United States after the murder of Trayvon Martin and how anti-Black police killings provide a foil to Obama's, you know, multi-ethnic language of hope and change. So yes, definitely.
Yep. And basically, in the book, though, the struggle, and I just put the title in the chat for everybody, the struggle over Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. Amanda Nell Edgar and I talk extensively about BLM, and matter of fact, are in the process of doing a follow-up, actually, and talking about BLM again as it relates to picking up, rather, with the murder of George Floyd, and talking about, you know, the summer and, you know, the uprisings that happened in 2020, summer of 2020, George Floyd, and how corporations and businesses and whole entities that could not even utter Black Lives Matter, but a year ago was tripping over themselves trying to, you know, so we'll probably be looking for a press to look at that. I don't know.
Okay, I know one.
Lisa,
I know one.
You can you help me out?
It's good to be directly in touch with one. Yeah. This has just been wonderful. I am so delighted we were able to do all this together. Lisa, Andre, Davis, this is a real wonderful hurrah for the Race, Rhetoric, and Media series. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I mean, we learned so much, amen, so much about mentoring and about the way you all worked on your books. I'm just absolutely delighted. Thank you all for being here and being part of University Press of Mississippi's 50th anniversary celebration. I want to remind you that both of these books and all books within the Race, Rhetoric, and Media series are on sale now until November 29th at a special discount that I think I've put twice in the chat just to make absolutely sure you could get the code for it. This has been a great evening. Thank you all so much.
Thanks so much, Steve and Davis.
You're welcome.
Thanks for saying yes to this.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Davis and Steve. This was wonderful.
Yay. Good night, you all.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much.
Shout out to all of my students.